My son was buttering bread with one hand and trying to steal my house with the other when my phone lit up under the white tablecloth. Get up and go. Don't say anything to your son. For a second, I thought my heart had skipped so hard it had knocked the room sideways. The fork slipped out of my fingers and hit the china with a sharp little crack that made the couple at the next table look over. Ryan didn't even blink. He was smiling at me across candlelight, expensive watch flashing at his wrist, a leather folder resting by my bread plate like it belonged there. 5 minutes later, I stood up and said 7 words that changed both our lives. Keep the steak. I'm keeping my house. I left him with a check, a half-poured glass of Cabernet, and whatever was inside that folder. What I found in the parking garage after that, whose name was on the papers waiting for me, and how far my own son had already gone before that dinner ever started, that was the part that finally broke the last excuse I had left for him. If you've ever had family smile while betraying you, stay with me. The truth is, dinner didn't start with that text. It started 3 weeks earlier, when Ryan asked me for a copy of my front door key in the same tone a man might ask to borrow a pen. We were in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. I'd made pot roast, because he used to love it as a boy, back when he was all scraped knees, and hollow legs, and thank you hugs, that nearly knocked the wind out of me. He was standing beside the sink, loosening his tie, looking around my house with that polished, measuring expression he'd learned sometime after law school, and before he started billing people by the hour. You should let me keep a spare, he said. Just in case. In case of what? In case you fall. In case you leave the stove on. In case something happens and we have to get in fast. He said it lightly, practical, concerned. The voice of a good son thinking ahead. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked at him a little longer than he liked. I've lived alone for 3 years, Ryan. I haven't turned into a raccoon. He gave me that patient smile people use on old men and children. Dad, nobody's saying you have. I'm just talking about responsibility. That word stayed with me after he left. Responsibility. It sounded noble in his mouth. It sounded like love in a business suit, but it didn't feel like love. Maybe I should tell you what that house was before it became real estate, in my son's head. It was cedar framing and raw plaster and payday sandwiches eaten on upside-down paint buckets. It was June standing barefoot in the doorway at 28, laughing because rain was coming through the unfinished roof, and I was cursing at the sky like the sky had personally offended me. It was the brass key we bought from a locksmith downtown the week we moved in, before Ryan was born. June threaded blue ribbon through the spare and hung it inside the hall cabinet so we'd never lock ourselves out. She used to say that house would outlast every bad season we ever had if we kept telling the truth inside it. June had been gone 3 years by then. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and mean. The kind that doesn't just take a person, it takes the shape of your days. After she died, the house got louder in the wrong places. The refrigerator motor. Pipes settling at night. My own footsteps returning to me from empty rooms. I was 71, and still sharp enough to know loneliness can make you forgive things you shouldn't. So when Ryan started coming by more often, I let myself enjoy it. He'd bring coffee from that place where they spell your name wrong with confidence. His wife, Celeste, started texting me heart emojis and asking if I needed groceries. She had the kind of beauty that always looked expensive, even in leggings. Her nails were pale pink and perfect. Her smile never reached all the way up, unless other people were watching. She called me Harold instead of Dad, though we'd been family for 16 years. At first it felt like concern. Then I noticed concern had a habit of looking through drawers. One Tuesday, Celeste stopped by with muffins I didn't ask for. While I made coffee, she wandered into the hall like she knew the house better than I did. When she came back, she was holding the framed photo of June and me at our 40th anniversary party. I always loved this one, she said. But her eyes weren't on the photo. They were on the small cabinet beneath it, the one where I kept old documents, spare keys, and the deed in a fireproof envelope. The next morning, the blue ribbon spare key was gone. I stood there with the cabinet door open and felt something cold move through me. Not panic, not yet. More like the moment before a storm when the leaves turn their pale undersides to the sky. I told myself I'd misplaced it. That was the problem with loving your own child. Your mind will build ladders over holes your instincts are screaming about. A few days later, I got a voicemail from a memory clinic across town, confirming my intake evaluation for Friday morning. I had never scheduled a memory evaluation. I called back. The receptionist sounded confused. She said the appointment had been requested by a family member on your behalf because of concerning episodes. She wouldn't give me the name without authorization. I canceled the appointment and sat in my recliner with the phone in my lap until the room went dim around me. Concerning episodes. There's a particular kind of humiliation in hearing your life reworded by someone else before you even know it's happening. I had lost my wife, not my mind. I paid my own bills. I drove myself. I kept my garden alive through August, and my blood pressure lower than most men 20 years younger. But somewhere, in someone else's mouth, I had already become a story. That should have been enough to confront him. It wasn't, because every time I almost did, memory got in the way. I remembered Ryan at 19, sitting at this same kitchen table with an acceptance letter to law school and tears in his eyes because he didn't think we could afford it. I remembered taking the night maintenance job at the county courthouse at 58, polishing other men's floors after working my regular shift, just so he wouldn't have to give up his place. I remembered refinancing the house during June's first round of chemo when his scholarship fell apart, and he said it was only for a year, just until he got on his feet. He got on his feet. Then he climbed onto my back and kept climbing. The first truly ugly moment came at his daughter Emma's 17th birthday dinner. Not because anyone screamed. Family betrayals rarely announce themselves with opera. They come dressed in manners. Ryan and Celeste had rented a private room at a glossy little Italian place, with hanging Edison bulbs and waiters who treated tap water like an inconvenience. I got there early with Emma's gift, a walnut jewelry box I'd made by hand in my garage. She'd always liked to sit with me while I worked. Said the smell of sawdust reminded her of safety. When I walked into the room, Celeste took one look at the wrapped box and said, smiling, "Oh, Harold, you didn't have to bring something homemade. We've already overwhelmed her with gifts." Homemade? Like I'd shown up with a macaroni necklace. Emma saw my face and crossed the room to hug me, hard enough to save me from saying something. "Grandpa made it?" she asked. "He did," Celeste said too quickly. "And it's sweet." Sweet? Homemade? The vocabulary of people who think price tags are character references. Later, while everyone was taking photos in front of the cake, I heard Celeste whisper to Ryan near the wine cart, "If we're serious about the house, we need to move before the market cools." I couldn't hear his answer, just the low murmur. Then Celeste looked over at me and softened her face into concern so fast, it was like watching a mask click into place. That night, I checked online and saw 3 houses on my street had sold in the last month for numbers that made my stomach tighten. Then my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez stopped me by the mailbox and said, "I hope you got what you wanted from that realtor." "What realtor?" "The blonde lady who was taking pictures of your front porch last Thursday. I assumed she was with you." My hands went still on the stack of circulars. Celeste was a realtor. I said, "Thank you," went inside, and sat at the kitchen table where June used to pay bills. The late light was coming through the curtains in thin gold bands. On the table was the little ceramic bowl Ryan made in 2nd grade, blue glaze running down one side, where it had bubbled in the kiln. June used to keep spare change in it. For years I'd dropped my house key there every night out of habit. I looked at that bowl and knew 2 things at once. Something was wrong, and I still didn't know how wrong. The call to dinner came 2 days later. Ryan invited me to a steakhouse downtown I could never have afforded when he was young, and had never wanted once I could. He sounded unusually warm on the phone, said he'd been thinking a lot about family, said we should have a real talk, man to man. That alone should have warned me. Men who want your signature always start by calling you man to man. I almost declined. Then he said, "Dad, please. I know things have felt off. I want to clear the air." Clear the air. There are phrases people use when what they really mean is shape the air before you arrive. I drove in just before sunset. The valet looked about 14 and called me sir 3 times before handing me a claim ticket. Inside, the restaurant smelled like charred meat, polished wood, and money. Ryan was already seated in a corner booth. He stood when he saw me and hugged me with one arm. His cufflinks caught the light. On the seat beside him was a leather folder, embossed with the initials of his firm. "Dad," he said, smiling, "you look good." That was another thing I'd learned to hear differently. When people are preparing to argue you're deteriorating, they suddenly start complimenting your surface. "We ordered." He asked about my tomatoes, my knee, whether I was sleeping. Then, too casually, he said, "Have you thought any more about simplifying things?" Things? Bills? The house. End-of-life stuff. I cut into my steak and looked up slowly. "I'm chewing. You'll have to be more specific." He leaned back. "Nobody's attacking you. I'm trying to protect you." From across the table, the leather folder sat there, like a third person listening. Then my phone buzzed under the tablecloth. "Get up and go. Don't say anything to your son." My pulse slammed so hard into my throat I could taste metal. I kept my face down, like I was checking a sports score. Ryan was reaching for his wine. Another message came before I could think. "Do not sign anything. Lower garage. 3 minutes." I looked at the number. Unknown. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked. I wiped my mouth with the napkin because my hand was shaking. "I forgot my pills in the car." "You need me to come?" "No." He started to say something else, but I was already pushing back from the booth. My legs felt watery and hyper-aware at the same time, like I could feel each joint separately. I picked up my keys. He touched the leather folder. "Before you go," he said, voice still soft, "I really think we should." That was when I heard myself say it. "Keep the steak. I'm keeping my house." For the first time all evening, his face emptied. Not angry, not confused, just naked for a second. Like a man whose hand has been caught inside somebody else's pocket. "What are you talking about?" he said. But I was already walking. I did not run. There is a dignity in not running from your own son, even when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to get outside. The elevator to the lower garage smelled like oil and concrete dust. When the doors opened, a woman in a navy coat stepped out of the shadows beside a pillar and said my name in a low voice. "Mr. Bennett?" She was in her 30s, dark hair pulled back, face pale with the strain of having done something she knew could cost her job. "I'm Marisol Rivera. I work at Halpern & Chase. With your son." Everything in me went very still. She held out a manila envelope and a flash drive. "I'm sorry to do this here. I didn't know how else." I took the envelope but didn't open it yet. "How did you get my number?" "From the petition file." Petition? Not draft. Not notes. File. I opened the envelope with fingers that had suddenly gone clumsy. The first page was headed, "Petition for Emergency Temporary Guardianship." My name was on the top. Ryan's was listed as petitioner. Under the allegations, there were sentences about cognitive decline, missed medications, disorientation, unsafe cooking, financial confusion, and vulnerability to exploitation. It said I had recently become combative when family raised concerns. It said I had refused assessment. It said immediate intervention was necessary to protect me and my assets. My assets. There was an attached intake sheet from a memory care residence called Roseview Manor, with a start date for the following Monday. There was a draft power of attorney. There was a real estate listing consultation prepared under Celeste's brokerage for future sale upon appointment of guardian. And there, clipped neatly behind it all, was a typed incident summary dated tomorrow, describing a dinner in which I would become agitated, paranoid, and leave abruptly after accusing my son of theft. I looked up so fast, the garage lights seemed to lurch. "That date." "I know," Marisol said. "It was written before tonight happened." For a second, I could hear nothing but the far-off hum of traffic overhead and the blood in my ears. "He planned this?" She swallowed. "The petition was ready this afternoon. The hearing request was scheduled to be filed first thing in the morning. He told the partner reviewing it that tonight would provide the final proof that you were unstable if you resisted signing a voluntary arrangement." The word voluntary hit me so hard, I almost laughed. I turned pages. There was a physician's statement with a signature from a neurologist I had never met. There were photographs of my staircase, my stove, my medicine cabinet, my house itemized into weakness. "I didn't sign any release," I said. "You didn't. And I don't believe that doctor signed this either. I think they expected to clean it up later." I copied everything before I left. Why? She looked away for half a second, toward the elevator. Because 12 years ago my uncles put my father in a home long enough to empty his accounts. By the time anybody stopped them, most of it was gone. I recognized the language, the urgency, the way concern gets sharpened into a weapon. Her eyes came back to mine. And because your son told me to calendar a locksmith for your address. My grip tightened around the papers. A locksmith? For Monday morning? New locks. He said it was safer if access was limited after transition. Transition. That was their word for erasing me from my own front porch. I leaned against the cold concrete pillar because my knees had suddenly remembered my age, but my mind had never felt clearer. Marisol lowered her voice. He doesn't know I copied the file. He thinks I left. If you confront him tonight, he'll destroy what he can and say you're confused. You need a lawyer before sunrise. I nodded once. Then my phone began vibrating again. Ryan. I let it ring. Then, a voicemail. Dad, you left your jacket. Call me. And whatever you think this is, don't do anything dramatic. I listened to that in the garage with the petition in my hands and realized something ugly and simple. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about timing. I called the only person I knew who would answer at that hour and not ask foolish questions first. Denise Mercer, an elder law attorney June and I had met years back when we updated our wills. She had a voice like clean glass and a mind that never wandered. She answered on the third ring. Harold? I need help, I said. Tonight. By midnight, I was sitting at Denise's dining table in her robe and socks while she read every page Marisol had copied. Her husband made coffee and wisely stayed out of the room. Denise read with one hand against her temple, flipping pages faster as she went, then slower, then back to the physician's statement. Finally, she set it down and looked at me over her glasses. This is bad, she said. I gathered. It's also sloppy, which is a blessing. They got greedy. Predating an incident summary? Drafting a listing consultation before appointment? If we move quickly, that greed helps us. I stared at the wood grain in her table, because if I looked directly at her, I might say something weak. Is it enough? It's enough to start. First, you do not go home tonight alone. Second, we get you an independent cognitive evaluation in the morning. Third, we lock down your bank access, change digital passwords, and inventory every document in that house. Fourth, we install cameras and see whether your son thinks he already owns the place. I don't want to destroy him, I said before I could stop myself. Denise's face softened, but only a little. Harold, he drafted a plan to strip your rights, your house, and your credibility in one move. You're not destroying him. You're refusing to lie down. I slept in Denise's guest room for maybe 90 minutes. Not all at once. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan at 8 years old in a raincoat too big for him, holding June's hand on the first day of school. Then the image would slide and become Ryan at 50, sitting under restaurant candlelight with a guardianship petition in his briefcase and a smile on his face. Morning came gray and hard. By noon, I had taken a cognitive exam with a geriatric specialist who spoke to me like a man, not a file. I passed cleanly. Denise had already sent preservation demands to Ryan, his firm, and Celeste's brokerage. She also contacted the neurologist listed on the physician statement. By 3, the neurologist's office replied. The signature on the petition was not his. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Ryan moved fast. He called every relative I had left before dinner dishes were dry in their houses. By evening, my sister in Ohio had left me a shaky voicemail asking whether I was having episodes. My cousin Alan texted, Ryan says not to upset you, but maybe let the professionals help. Even Emma sent, Grandpa, Dad says you got scared at dinner. Are you okay? That hurt worse than the petition. Because reputation, once released into family, moves like smoke. It gets in the curtains. It clings to people who want the easiest version of events. And the easiest version was this. Aging widower declines, successful son steps in, old man resists because he's proud. I called Emma immediately. She answered in a whisper. Grandpa? I'm okay. Dad said you accused him of trying to rob you. There was a beat of silence between us. Did he say he wasn't? I heard her inhale. That was when I knew she already suspected more than he understood. Ryan came to the house the next morning with Celeste. We weren't there. Denise had arranged for 2 discreet outdoor cameras overnight, plus one inside the foyer aimed toward the hall cabinet and stairs. We watched from her office as my son used a key he had no right to have and let himself into my home at 9:14 a.m. Seeing that on a screen did something to me no document had managed. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He walked in like ownership was already just a matter of paperwork catching up to desire. Celeste followed carrying a clipboard and a box of pale linen hand towels. Of all things, she stood in my kitchen and said, "We need to neutralize the older smell before photos." Older smell. Ryan went straight to the hall cabinet and opened it. He took out my fireproof envelope, my deed, insurance papers, June's handwritten note that had been tucked inside for 38 years, "Home is where we tell the truth." He didn't know the inside camera could see his face when he read it, and shoved it back like it burned him. Then he said the sentence that cured me of any remaining softness. "Once he's in Roseview for 30 days, this gets easier." I didn't cry. I sat in Denise's office, watched my own son stand in the foyer I had built with my own hands, and felt grief turn into structure. Celeste walked through the rooms dictating things into her phone. Dining room table stays. It warms the space. Family story angle. Study gets cleared. Remove the old recliner before preview. Will say he's transitioning to supervised living after a minor health event. Minor health event. That was me. A marketing phrase. Ryan said, "We need to be careful until the hearing. Don't post anything." Celeste gave a short laugh. "Please. I'm not stupid." Then my son said, "Dad never notices half of what's happening around him." Denise paused the feed and looked at me. "We've got them." But she was wrong. Not yet. Because an hour later, a process server walked into Denise's office with the filed petition anyway. Ryan had gone ahead and submitted it before our letters hit. The allegations were cleaner now, less sloppy, more dangerous. By then he had also appended a statement claiming I had fled dinner in a paranoid state after misunderstanding routine estate planning. He requested temporary control over my residence and finances pending a hearing. He had adjusted. He had learned. And suddenly this was no longer about one crooked dinner. It was about whether I would let my son define reality before I did. That afternoon, Denise asked me a question no one had asked yet. "What do you want?" Not, "What do you fear?" Not, "What can be saved?" "What do you want?" I stared out her office window at a sycamore tree shaking in the wind. "I want my name back," I said. "And I want him to feel exactly where the line was." Denise nodded, like that was an answer she could work with. The next 48 hours became a kind of war, conducted through calendars, affidavits, and silence. Denise filed our response with the clean cognitive evaluation, the neurologist's denial, and an emergency motion concerning suspected elder exploitation. Marisol signed an affidavit of her own, hands trembling but steady enough to be useful. Miss S. Alvarez gave a statement about Celeste photographing my house without permission. The locksmith invoice surfaced in Ryan's firm email. Then, something even better arrived. Emma? She came to Denise's office after school in her uniform and sat across from me, twisting the strap of her backpack. Her eyes were red. She looked so much like Ryan had at that age that for a moment it nearly undid me. "I found something on Mom's laptop," she said. She slid her phone across the table. It was a draft invitation for a private broker preview at my address on Saturday evening. Wine, light bites, off-market historic opportunity. Hosted by Celeste Vale Realty. Saturday was 2 days away. I looked at Denise. She looked back at me and smiled for the first time since this started, but there was no warmth in it. "Greed," she said quietly, "is impatient." Emma swallowed. "Dad told Mom they had to get ahead of rumors and line up interest fast in case there were delays. He said, once you were moved, the rest would feel inevitable." There it was. The full shape at last. The mystery thread that had been pulling through every odd question. Missing key, fake appointment, porch photo, and polished little insult resolved into one ugly machine. They were not trying to help me. They were trying to make my removal feel natural. That realization landed clean. No fog left around it. No leftover excuses. I reached over and covered Emma's shaking hand with mine. Did they drag you into this? Her chin trembled once. Mom asked me if you'd seemed forgetful lately. I said no. Then Dad told me love means making hard choices before old people understand they need them. Old people. When your own son starts talking about you like a demographic, the funeral has already begun in his mind. Saturday evening, they lit my house like a stage. I saw it first through the live feed on Denise's tablet from the cameras we had left in place. Lamps on in the front windows, my dining room table polished until it gleamed. June's blue hydrangea pitcher centered with white roses that Celeste must have bought because she knew nothing about the real flowers June loved. Caterers moving through my kitchen in black shirts. Stemware on the sideboard I built this summer. Ryan turned 12. Strangers were about to drink Pinot Noir in the living room where my wife died. That was the moment anger finally stopped being heat and became something sharper. By 6:30, broker cars lined both sides of my street. A valet sign stood near my mailbox. Celeste was on the porch in a cream coat, smiling at guests as if she had been born owning my front steps. Ryan stood in the foyer, greeting people from his firm. 2 neighbors I barely knew, and a city councilman who owed him a favor. He looked handsome, controlled, the kind of man people trust because he irons well. Denise waited until the house was full enough to matter. Then we drove over. I wore my gray suit, the one from Emma's confirmation, and the old brass house key was in my pocket. Denise sat beside me with a file box on her lap. In the car behind us were a sheriff's deputy, a licensed process server, and a representative from the state bar's investigative arm who had taken a sudden interest once forged medical documentation entered the picture. When Denise touched my sleeve before we got out, her voice was low and exact. Once we go in, stay steady, let them talk. Truth likes witnesses. The front walk had been pressure washed. I noticed that, because once you understand betrayal, the smallest preparations start to look obscene. Celeste was halfway through saying and original millwork throughout to a pair of brokers when she saw me coming up my own path. Her smile froze first, then cracked. Ryan turned from the foyer, followed her stare, and actually took one step back. That tiny step fed me more strength than any speech could have. Guests began to go quiet in pockets as we entered. Glasses lowered. Conversations blurred and then thinned. "Dad," Ryan said, recovering fast. "What are you doing here?" I took out the brass key and held it up between 2 fingers. "Coming home." There are silences that are empty. Then there are silences so packed with consequence, they hum. Celeste found her voice first. "Harold, this is not a good time." "For you," Denise said. She moved past me into the foyer, like she owned velocity itself. "I'm Denise Mercer, counsel for Harold Bennett. Before anyone leaves, I'd appreciate your attention. Several of you may be witnesses to unlawful entry, attempted elder exploitation, and professional misconduct." That did it. Heads turned fully now. A woman near the staircase actually set her wine glass down on the floor because her hand had started shaking. Ryan gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is absurd." "It is," Denise said. "That's why we brought paperwork." The sheriff's deputy stepped in behind us. The process server moved toward Ryan with an envelope. Ryan's face lost color. "Mr. Bennett? You are hereby served," the server said. Ryan didn't take it. The man tucked it against his chest anyway. Celeste snapped. "You cannot storm into a private event." "A private event?" I said. "In my house?" Now people were staring at her. I walked forward, slow enough that no one could call it agitation, and laid my hand on the back of the dining chair June always used. The wood was smooth beneath my palm. I had carved those chairs myself. Celeste had put canapes on them. "You told people this was a transition," I said, looking at Ryan. "Tell them transition to what?" "Dad, please don't do this." There it was again. Not, "Don't lie." Not, "You misunderstand." Just, "Don't do this." As if truth were bad manners. Denise opened the file box on the dining table. "Let's help," she said. One by one, in front of brokers, partners, neighbors, and my own son's carefully chosen audience, she laid out the pieces. The emergency guardianship petition. naming Ryan petitioner. The forged physician statement from a neurologist who had already denied signing it. The draft memory care intake dated before I was ever evaluated. The pre-written incident summary describing a dinner scene before that dinner happened. The listing consultation prepared under Celeste's brokerage for the sale of my home upon appointment of guardian. The locksmith appointment. The camera stills showing Ryan and Celeste entering my residence with a copied key and discussing my removal, the older smell, and the need to move fast before the hearing. The room changed with every page, not loudly, not dramatically. Just molecule by molecule, trust left them. Ryan's firm partner, a silver-haired man I recognized from Christmas cards, took one document from Denise and read it twice. "Ryan," he said too softly, "tell me this isn't real." Ryan looked at me like I had detonated something unfair. "You recorded us?" "In my own house," I said. Celeste tried a new strategy. "This is being twisted. We were trying to protect Harold. He has been forgetful. He gets confused. He left dinner in a paranoid state, and—" "I left dinner," I said, "because your husband had already prepared papers saying I would." That landed. Someone near the fireplace muttered, "Jesus Christ." Ryan straightened, anger finally pushing through the polish. "You don't understand the pressure we were under." I almost smiled. Pressure. That was his defense. Not innocence, pressure. Denise said, "Go on. I think everyone would love clarity." His eyes flashed toward the guests, then back to me. For a second I saw the boy in him. The one who used to blame weather, teachers, luck, anybody at all before he admitted fault. Then he made his choice. "The house is worth $2 million, he said. "You're alone. You can't maintain it forever. We were trying to put a plan in place before a crisis forced worse decisions." No one spoke. Because now, the truth had taken off its tie. I asked him, quietly, "By forging a doctor's signature?" He said, "Nothing." "By calling me impaired before I knew I'd been accused?" "Still nothing." "By listing my house while I was still sleeping in it?" Celeste stepped in, voice sharp now. "Nobody listed it." Emma's voice came from the doorway behind the brokers. "You drafted invitations, Mom." Every head turned. She stood there in her school coat, with tears on her face and fury holding her upright. Marisol was beside her. I had not known Denise ask them to come, and in that moment I loved her for understanding that some endings need the right witnesses. Emma took out her phone with both hands and held it up. "I saw the preview invite. I heard Dad say once Grandpa was in Roseview, the rest would feel inevitable." Ryan's face changed in a way I will never forget. Not because he was sorry, because he realized the wrong person had hurt him. "Emma," he said, low and warning. She flinched anyway, then kept going. "And you told me love means making hard choices before old people understand they need them." One of the brokers actually stepped back from Celeste, like misconduct was contagious. Marisol handed Denise another page. I also brought the email chain where Mr. Bennett requested expedited filing before counsel reviewed the medical attachment. Ryan swung toward her. "You stole privileged documents." Marisol didn't blink. "I preserved evidence of suspected elder abuse." The bar investigator, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Mr. Bennett, I'd advise you to stop." That was the moment his control left him for good. He looked around the room, at the partner no longer meeting his eye, at the deputy by the door, at Celeste whose face had gone brittle and white, at Emma openly crying, at me standing in the foyer of my own house, with one hand on the chair I had built. And because men like Ryan can't bear helplessness, he reached for the nearest cruelty. "You always do this," he snapped at me. "You make yourself the victim after everything we've done for you." I felt something in me settle all the way down. Not rise, settle. "What you did for me," I said. "I refinanced this house so you could stay in school. I worked nights while your mother was sick, so you wouldn't have to quit. I paid your first retainer when you opened your practice, and your last bridge loan when you hid your debt. Your wife photographed my porch before I even knew I was a problem to be solved. And you sat across from me, at dinner with papers ready to erase me while I chewed my steak. I took one step closer. Don't ever confuse access to my sacrifice with permission to bury me." No one in that room looked away. The sheriff's deputy cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Vale Bennett, you need to leave the premises." Celeste gave a tiny laugh that sounded like glass cracking. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe," I said, "but it's over." Ryan stared at me for one long beat, and I think he expected, even then, that blood would save him, that I would soften, that fatherhood was a door he could still unlock from the outside. It wasn't. He looked at Emma. "Get your coat." She didn't move. "I'm staying with Grandpa tonight," she said. That hurt him. I was glad. When they finally walked out, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no thrown glasses, just the terrible plainness of consequences. Guests parted to let them through. Nobody stopped them. Nobody rushed after them to say, "There must be some misunderstanding." The front door opened, cold air slid in, and my son left my house under the eyes of people he had invited to admire what he meant to take. After the last of them was gone, the silence felt holy. I stood in the foyer for a minute, with the brass key in my hand. The white roses Celeste had brought still sat on my dining table like a lie in a pretty dress. Emma came up beside me and put her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was little. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You didn't do this." "No, but I saw pieces. I should have told you sooner." I looked at the roses, then at June's old note where Denise had set it carefully beside the file box. "Home is where we tell the truth." "You're here now," I said. That night, we carried every fake touch out of the house. The rented towels, the wine glasses, the catered trays. Emma opened windows in every room despite the cold because she said she wanted the place to smell like itself again. Denise laughed at that and helped me gather documents until almost midnight. Before she left, she made me promise to change every lock in the morning with a locksmith of my choosing. I kept that promise. What happened after moved faster than grief and slower than gossip. Ryan's firm placed him on immediate leave. Celeste's brokerage suspended her pending investigation. The guardianship petition was withdrawn before the hearing and replaced, for them, by a far uglier set of questions from people with actual authority. I didn't celebrate any of that. Justice is not the same thing as joy. Sometimes it just looks like the lie finally losing oxygen. My sister called and cried when she learned the truth. My cousin Alan sent a long apology full of words like complicated and unimaginable. I let him apologize. I did not make him comfortable. Emma stayed with me for 2 weeks. We ate tomato soup at the kitchen table and watched old black and white movies June used to love. One afternoon she asked if I would teach her how to sand and stain wood properly, so we went into the garage and started a cedar hope chest together. There are some kinds of repair you can only do with your hands. Ryan called 3 times in the first month. I listened to none of the voicemails. Denise said I might need them later. Maybe I did, but I already knew what was in them. Explanation, pressure, regret shaped to resemble need. Celeste never called at all. The hardest part, strangely enough, wasn't the legal mess or the paperwork, or even seeing my son turned into a headline in smaller circles than he preferred. The hardest part was the ordinary hour around 5 in the evening, when the light in my kitchen goes amber and the house used to expect June. That was when I understood this had never only been about property. It was about whether grief had made me so hungry for family that I would accept counterfeit love just because it used my name. I wouldn't. By spring, I updated my will. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The house will someday go to Emma, if she still wants it when I'm gone. Not because blood earns brick, because she told the truth when truth cost her something. Denise helped me set up a trust for her education and for the upkeep of the place if she chooses to keep it. If she doesn't, it'll be sold, and the money will fund a legal aid program for elders fighting exploitation. Ryan taught me how common this kind of theft is. I decided he would at least help stop it in others. The blue ribbon spare key is back in the hall cabinet now, not hanging carelessly. Resting in the ceramic bowl Ryan made in 2nd grade, the glaze still bubbled on one side. I thought about throwing that bowl out after everything. I didn't. Objects don't betray you, people do. And sometimes keeping a thing is how you admit the past was real without letting it own the future. A few nights ago, Emma and I ate dinner at the old table. Real dinner. Meatloaf, peas, too much pepper, laughter in the kitchen when the timer went off too early. Rain tapped lightly on the windows. The house smelled like onions, soap, and cedar dust from the garage. After we cleared the plates, she held up the brass key and said, "You know Grandma was right." "About what?" "This house only works if the truth lives here." I took the key from her and felt its worn edges press into my palm, smooth from 40 years of being used by the right hands. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like I was guarding something. It felt like I was home,